Whether because of touchy audience expectations, sneaky moral implication, or thoroughly disturbing imagery, there are plenty of ways that horror movies can make death unforgettably controversial. Mostly remembered today for popularizing the found footage genre, 1999's The Blair Witch Project memorably blurred the line between reality and fiction. The film's inspired marketing campaign grounded the story in reality to the extent that some viewers actually believed it was a legitimate documentary. This extended to the production of the movie itself, as the actors were deliberately kept in the dark about their fates. Some of their frightened reactions were genuine, which caused real tension between the cast and crew, and further added to the sense of realism. The final sequence plays on the mental exhaustion of the two remaining actors, with their characters drawn to an abandoned cabin in the woods by the cries of their missing friend. Heather runs down to the cellar to discover Mike standing in the corner in a recreation of past victims of the witch. Then Heather is attacked herself, and her camera drops to the ground. It's a shocking, abrupt end that led audiences to believe that the actors had really been killed. Their families even received condolences from some viewers.
I'm so sorry.
Critics pilloried 1960's Peeping Tom as morally reprehensible for forcing the audience to identify with its serial killer lead character. That lead character is Mark, a photographer who kills young women while filming them, thereby capturing their final terrified expressions. The death of the dancer Vivian might be the most upsetting scene, as the mood shifts suddenly from carefree to intensely sinister. The look of dawning realization on Vivian's face as Mark advances on her remains unsettling even decades later. Peeping Tom elicited negative reviews from contemporary critics, who decried it as lurid and disgusting. It effectively ended director Michael Powell's career in the UK and forced him to spend the remainder of his career in Australia. But the film has since been reevaluated, with the likes of Martin Scorsese praising the way it depicts filmmaking's obsessive grip on a creative mind. Looking back on Peeping Tom nowadays, it's a little starchy and stilted, but there's something undeniably subversive that helps it retain its status as a classic. The 1997 Austrian film Funny Games is an incredibly uncomfortable watch, despite being described by writer-director Michael Haneke as a self-reflexive anti-horror film. It follows a family held captive by a pair of disarmingly confident sociopaths who delight in playing childish, often fatal games with them. However, the most controversial death occurs when the family's mother, Anna, finally gains the upper hand by grabbing a shotgun and killing one of the invaders, Peter. But soon after he hits the ground, his accomplice Paul picks up a remote control and rewinds the film to undo the shooting, thus completely erasing Anna's actions. This audacious move drew hostility from audiences, who thought they finally saw a glimmer of light in this relentlessly fatalistic film, only for it to be cruelly snuffed out. Haneke plays a cynical game of his own with the audience's expectations, by compelling viewers to reevaluate how we consume entertainment, especially horror films. With several fourth-wall-breaking looks to the camera, he directly addresses the audience's complicity in the violence by how we choose to watch scenes of horror. And he basically welcomed the backlash to this depiction of violence when he declared, "Anyone who leaves the cinema doesn't need the film, and anyone who stays does."
Ist immer doch ein richtiges Ende mit plausibler Entwicklung, oder?
Danish filmmaker Lars von Trier has never been one to shy away from controversy, and his first outright horror film, 2018's The House That Jack Built, may be his most controversial yet. It reportedly resulted in about 100 walkouts at the Cannes Film Festival, as well as a standing ovation. Following Matt Dillon as the titular Jack over the course of 12 years, he recounts numerous encounters with women whom he kills in truly horrific ways. In the most controversial scene, he goes hunting with his new girlfriend and her two sons, only to ruthlessly hunt them down. Von Trier doesn't spare the audience from the gruesome moment, as his dispassionate camera reflects his protagonist's cold-blooded nature. The deaths are presented in graphic detail, as Jack forces the mother to have a picnic with her son's corpses before killing her as well. The House That Jack Built is filled with moments that are stomach-churning, and others that are darkly comic. It's controversial to be sure, but a calculated kind of controversy, where you get the distinct feeling that Von Trier simply made it to upset people. He's even been quoted as saying, "I'm not sure they hated it enough." With one of the most bonkers horror premises ever, the 1976 Spanish film Who Can Kill a Child follows Tom and Evelyn, a young couple with a baby on the way, as they take a relaxing vacation. On a remote Spanish island, they slowly discover something very sinister, as an unseen force compels the children to kill every adult who crosses their path.
There is something wrong on this island.
The death of Evelyn is easily the most upsetting part. After allowing a child to touch her pregnant belly, her fetus begins killing her from the inside. It's not a particularly gory scene, but it's incredibly disturbing, and the horror is vividly presented. It proved disturbing enough for the film to be heavily censored upon its release. It's not so much the violence of who can kill a child itself that's controversial, but rather the macabre idea of children committing these crimes. The video nasties era of the United Kingdom in the 1970s meant that films that otherwise might have been ignored were instead granted notoriety by being banned. Italian filmmaker Lucio Fulci had 3 entries on the video nasties list, more than any other director. One of them, Zombie Flesh Eaters, also known as Zombie 2, has plenty of stomach-churning moments, as well as one scene of a zombie fighting a shark. But the most famous of all is the sequence in which the character of Paola has her face slowly pulled towards a jagged splinter of wood conveniently positioned exactly at eye level. Just when you think that Fulci will cut away, he instead shows the splinter slowly puncture her eyeball. It's a prolonged, agonizing sequence that remains upsetting to this day, so you can understand the authorities' decision in this case. This scene in particular drove the censors mad and was edited way down by the British Board of Film Classification. The film wasn't fully released in its intact form until 2005, when all the gore was finally restored in all its glory. The infamous scene from the 2015 horror western Bone Tomahawk truly lives up to its reputation. It's grisly, graphic, and realistic, and considering the relative quaintness of the film up to this point, it really comes out of nowhere. When a group of townspeople are abducted from his quiet little town, Sheriff Franklin Hunt leads a rescue mission to bring them back. The expedition brings him face to face with a monstrous, barbaric tribe who take him captive and then bisect and dismember his loyal deputy Nick in front of him. This may very well be the most viscerally horrific death scene ever committed to film. Without it, Bone Tomahawk may have faded into undeserved obscurity. But instead, it helped bring attention to the film's wonderful script and the perfectly judged performances. Many viewers argued that this scene was gratuitous and crossed a line, and it's true that it's an incredibly tough watch. What really sells the horror, though, is Kurt Russell's utterly numb reaction. By the end of the sequence, Sheriff Hunt is completely bereft of any hope, and Russell memorably conveys this without any hysterics.
I thought it might be possible he had a secret backup plan.
I'm sorry, old man.
The 2018 remake of the 1977 Italian classic Suspiria proved controversial in a number of ways, especially for the particularly gruesome death of one character. After a student named Olga decries a dance school as being run by witches, she attempts to leave, only to find herself trapped in a dance hall. The Coven's revenge is swift, as they use magic to link Olga to Dakota Johnson's Susie, who's beginning her dance routine. Olga is thrown around in a grotesque mockery of Susie's beautiful choreography. Powerless to protect herself, Olga's body contorts and breaks. It's a truly disturbing scene, made even more so by the bone-crunching sound design. The worst thing is how at the end of all of this, Olga doesn't even die. Instead, she's just a twisted, broken mass of bones and muscles, eventually moved out of the hall by witches brandishing meat hooks. She survives in that state until the very end of the film, when she's finally mercifully put out of her misery. The film was even marketed on the strength of this nasty scene, as the horrified reactions of viewers were captured for a promo video.
Oh god, she twitched.
Director Todd Browning was way ahead of his time in depicting sideshow acts as fully fleshed out, sympathetic characters for most of 1932's freaks. But in the film's climax, he becomes a bit more sensational, as the freaks take their revenge on the couple who have been poisoning one of their group. The murder of circus strongman Hercules is perhaps the most controversial scene, as the vengeful performers pursue him through the rain, brandishing knives and straight razors. He's killed off-screen, although in the original cut, his fate is even nastier. Deleted scenes that have since been lost heavily implied that he was castrated, as evidenced by a scene showing him singing in a chilling falsetto. The original cut was so controversial that an audience member at a test screening threatened to sue MGM for causing her miscarriage. It was torn apart by critics, with one even predicting the looming production code that was coming to shape Hollywood. As a film made before the institution of the Hays Production Code and its rules of self-censorship, Freaks could get away with some pretty nasty moments. However, it still faced censorship and was banned in some regions outside the US, including the United Kingdom, where it only became available in 1963. It had serious ramifications as well for Browning, whose career never recovered. A philosophical, existential rumination on mortality and religion, 2008's Martyrs really pushes the boundaries of what is acceptable in cinema. Despite whatever thought-provoking message it may contain, the relentless depiction of violence led many to dismiss it as simply gratuitous torture porn. The treatment of the character of Anna is particularly cruel. She's established as a strong-willed young woman, which makes her torture at the hands of a religious cult all the more disturbing. The cult is determined to prove the existence of the afterlife, which they choose to do so by martyring a young woman by torturing her to the point of death. She'll then supposedly receive a vision that will verify the existence of the afterlife. Anna manages to withstand most of the torture thrown her way, until she reaches the final stage, when she's flayed alive. It's a horrific scene, but in the end, she retains enough of her resilience to take revenge on her killers, or at least that's one interpretation of the enigmatic ending. It's an unflinching portrayal of death, though there's a point to it. Martyrs has gained a reputation as part of the new French extremity movement that pushes the envelope in terms of violence and gore. It's actually more intellectual and less sensationalist than you might think, but that didn't stop audiences from walking out of numerous festival screenings, including its premiere at Cannes. Fans voiced outrage at the death of Randy Meeks when Scream 2 came out 1 year after the hugely successful first Scream, and his ultimate demise is unnerving in several ways. The fact it happens in broad daylight in an open space feels like a violation in itself. Randy was one of the original core characters, and arguably the most likable of the bunch. He was certainly the one that movie geeks most identified with. Killing him off halfway through the sequel was certainly a bold narrative choice, and it's especially upsetting that it happens just after his finest moment in the series, as he tells Ghostface exactly what he thinks. And his death isn't signposted at all, as it's instead a genuine gut punch that nonetheless demonstrates why sometimes it's necessary to kill your best characters.
Where's your innovation, huh?
To this day, Jamie Kennedy is still stopped in the street by fans annoyed that Randy died too soon. Meanwhile, Scream screenwriter Kevin Williamson has admitted that he regrets killing off Randy, and that he wouldn't have done it if he realized just how popular the series would become. He and director Wes Craven implicitly addressed this misstep in subsequent installments, including a pre-recorded video of Randy in Scream 3 and his niece Mindy appearing as a surrogate version of her uncle in the later entries. It was banned in the United Kingdom for 23 years, so you could easily be forgiven for thinking that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is as gory as its title suggests. But there's actually plenty of restraint demonstrated by director Tobe Hooper in the death scenes. Indeed, he originally intended the film to receive a PG rating, as he argued that only one character actually dies by chainsaw. Despite the relative lack of gore, this film is still plenty disturbing. What makes it remain so disconcerting is the sudden, offhand execution of the deaths. Perhaps the most notorious one is that of easygoing Pam. This sequence caused a stir at the time due to its perceived gore, but it's actually relatively bloodless, at least by modern horror standards. Pam is seized by the imposing Leatherface, who effortlessly carries her to a slaughterhouse, where he unceremoniously hangs her on a meat hook. The nastiness is all achieved through editing and the power of suggestion, but that didn't stop audiences from walking out in outrage. Ironically, it was the lack of gore that caused serious problems for the film, at least in the UK. The British Board of Film Classification decided that the tone was so intense and the scene so carefully edited that cutting it down any more wouldn't make the film any less nasty. The head of the BBFC even called it the pornography of terror and refused to release it. It remained unavailable in the UK until 1999. George Romero never shied away from social commentary throughout his filmmaking career. He maintained that the casting of an African American in the lead role in 1968's Night of the Living Dead simply boiled down to Dwayne Jones being the best actor for the part. And it's true that Jones gives a commanding performance as Ben, the story's lone, level-headed character. However, considering the social context of when the film was made, it's impossible to ignore the parallels between the race relations of the era and the treatment of Ben throughout the movie. And his death in the movie's final scene is the best example of this. By the end, Ben is the sole survivor after defending a farmhouse from an onslaught of zombies. He then emerges from the shadows, only to be unceremoniously shot by a group of redneck hunters who mistake him for one of the undead. The subsequent newsreel-style footage that plays over the end credits is especially uncomfortable. The imagery of Ben's body being dragged along by meat hooks and flung into a pyre recalls real-life photographs of lynching. This treatment of one of the few black protagonists as somehow less than human by the overwhelmingly white mob of hunters held up a mirror to one of the biggest social problems in America.
Good shot.
There were multiple real animals slaughtered during the production of 1980's Cannibal Holocaust, and there were also serious allegations that the humans were treated just as mercilessly. Director Ruggero Deodato shot this film with such documentary realism that he was accused of actually killing his cast, to the point that he had to get them to appear in court to prove that they were still alive. This was an unintended side effect of Deodato's plan, as he added temporary disappearance clauses to his actors' contracts, in which they had to agree to lie low for a year after filming ended. There's a subversive symmetry to Deodato's filmmaking and the story on screen, as Cannibal Holocaust depicts exploitative filmmakers manipulating reality to fit their own narrative. None of the characters are particularly sympathetic, and they're shown to be responsible for many of the film's most barbaric acts. In perhaps the nastiest human death, the crew sexually assaults an indigenous girl, only to later discover her body impaled on a huge wooden pole, and it's strongly suggested that the camera crew bears responsibility for her death, considering how they're shown smirking when they observe her corpse.
This so-called documentary footage is offensive, it is dishonest, and above all, it is inhuman.
One of the most famous movie scenes ever, the shower kill in 1960's Psycho, might also be the most important death in horror cinema history. It certainly set the gold standard for the tactic of killing off the main character halfway through the film. Janet Leigh was arguably the biggest name in the cast at that point. Anthony Perkins' star was certainly on the rise, but it was Psycho that really put him on the map. It's still jarring today watching the audience identification figure killed so soon, even when you know that it's coming. At the time of the movie's release, it caused genuine hysteria in audiences, who reportedly ran for the doors and fainted in their seats. It was banned in several countries and heavily edited for release in the UK. In addition to all that, the sheer amount of violence in this scene is still genuinely upsetting, especially considering the shower setting, with Marion Crane at her most vulnerable. Many viewers at the time swore that they saw the knife actually stabbing Leigh. However, there isn't a single frame showing the blade going in. Instead, director Alfred Hitchcock achieved the effect through some incredibly fast-paced editing and that iconic, piercing soundtrack.